articulate as to why we earned the honor of your
Well,
today?
it's really quite simple. At a time when New York is flirting with financial disaster, partisan politics has to be put aside, and people have to be focused on what is best for the state. And I don't think there's any question that by training, and experience, and knowledge, Harry is a superior candidate and will be an outstanding state controller. And his creativity and energy and willingness to innovate are just what the state needs. So I'm very happy to support him and do whatever I can to help you win.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it means a lot to me, both because of your experience, but also because what you said about this should transcend partisan politics. If we can't, for two reasons. One, because the position itself should be a nonpartisan position, at least in the way it's conducted. But two, because if we can't get past our partisan differences, we're not going to solve our problems. And I think we're going to need a bipartisan coalition for reform across both the executive branch and the controller and the legislature in order to really achieve what needs to get done in the next 4 years.
I think so, and John, who is much more focused than I am on these matters, made that case to be very forceful and very energetically, and it's a great partisan of yours, a great enthusiast of your campaign. So.
And despite being out of politics for 20 years, when Harry wins, if he calls on you for guidance, you'd be willing to lend him some advice?
When shortly after I was elected, within a week, I called people to see them, visit them. One of the people I called was a legendary New York City civil servant. His name was Harry Bronstein. He had been in office, in public service for many, many years. He had a commanding reputation as a master of lots of things that I needed to know. I sat down with him and I said, Harry, I appreciate your help. He said, I want to tell you a story. He said, when Abe Beame ran against John Lindsay, he said, I supported Abe Beame enthusiastically. We'd grown up in civil service together. We were friends. And he said, John Lindsay won. And the first week he was in office, he called me into his office and said, Harry, I know you supported Abe Beame, but I need your help. Harry Bronstein said to me, I said to the mayor, Mr. Mayor, there could be a chimpanzee sitting in that chair. He said, but if the mayor of the city of New York asks me to help him, I'm going to help him. I've never forgotten that. You know, I'm a citizen, and I'm concerned about the state. I'm an admirer of Harry Wilson, and I have no personal interest, obviously, but I'd be glad to help you in any way. And I told you that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite apart from this little session we're having, but once you take office or once you're elected, if there's anything I can do to help you, I will. And it's hard in the maelstrom of what goes on to sit back and be reflective. You start to vet people. There are lots of things that you may want somebody who is not self-serving to help you, and I'll be glad to do that.
Thank you.
The city controller during a particularly sort of difficult time in the city's fiscal history, what advice would you have for the incoming controller of New York State during also a potentially fiscally troubling time in New York State's history?
Well, I think Harry's exactly on the right track. His willingness to push the limits of the powers of the state controller, it seems to me, is just what the situation requires. If and when you take a position that the state budget is not in balance because the revenue estimates, for example, are inflated or not reliable, you're going to be up against a lot of pressure from the legislature and others. Legislature because the members can't get paid. And that's going to test your fortitude. I can tell you from my own experience, when you are young and aggressive and willing to test the limits of the powers, people are going to come down on you very hard. But I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And quite apart from whatever reforms you implement in the management of the pension funds, which everybody's going to be looking at, this willingness to get involved in the real problems of the state is what's going to, I think, distinguish you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's been interesting as I've kind of traveled around. It's there's such widespread understanding of how deep the problems are amongst the general public, and I think that as much pressure as there will be to kind of shy away from aggressive action, I think that the popular support will be really strong. And I feel like the people who get elected this time around are going to have a real mandate for more aggressive reforms.
This was unions. The second was financial institutions. In those days, financial institutions, unlike today, had a lot invested in New York. The banks today and the major investment banking firms, the insurance companies, they had very little exposure to New York. But they had a lot of it in those days. And there is always an inertia. Let God provide. You know, it'll get better over time. It always gets better. It'll get better. Don't rock the boat if you don't say anything. And so there were people, and people of stature, who said to me, by speaking up and talking about the problem, you're making it worse. You're precipitating a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. So that was another. The newspapers, the editorial boards of the newspapers, thought the problem couldn't be nearly so serious as I said it would. But to cut through it all, the hero of all of this was the governor, Governor Carey. Because within weeks of his taking office, I had lunch with Mayor Wagner, who was a great friend of Governor Carey's. And I said to him at lunch, you know, this is the problem. I laid it out for him. And he said to me, would you be willing to talk to the governor? And I said, yes, of course I would. He called me back in the afternoon. He said, I called Governor Carey. And I said to Carey, I had lunch with Jay Goldin. Carey said, that's nice. And Wagner told me, he said to Carey, Hugh, do you remember you once wanted to be mayor? And Carey said, yeah. Carey had run for mayor and lost. He said, yes, I do. He said, now you're governor. He said, yeah, I'm governor. So he said, one thing you never wanted to be was governor and mayor at the same time. He said, you're going to be, unless you do something. So I met with Carey the next morning, and we spent a couple of hours together, and he understood the problem and immediately got on it. He called Judge Rifkin from Paul Weiss. Judge Rifkin recommended that he get an advisor, and recommended Felix Rowan, and everything just took off from there. So that's a long-winded answer.
Any parallels today?
Exactly, I was going to say the same thing. It's like, you look at the kind of this, there's that great new book that just came out on that whole period of time, but we think about kind of the coalition government was able to assemble and all the efforts that took place and the shared sacrifice that made it possible across a lot of different stakeholders. Do you think how much of that do you think is still possible today, and what do you think the kind of biggest impediments are?
Well, I think that many people are aware of the 70s and the 80s, and many people are aware that the state is flirting with financial disaster. That's a very important difference between now and 30 years ago. But the problem is that a controller needs to be self-conscious about a perception as to what is appropriate for the institutional law. You're not the governor. You're not the Speaker of the Assembly. You're not the Majority Leader of the State Senate. So there will be a sophisticated role that you'll have to play. That will be both a leadership role and a recognition that the way out of this is not the prerogative of the state controller. That's going to be tough. And my suggestion is that one of the first things that you would do after you're elected is call Shelley Silver and ask to sit down with him, ask to sit down with the heads of the major unions, ask to sit down with principal players who are not your supporters. And it'll be awkward, and there'll be a certain amount of suspicion and cynicism about why you're doing that. But it's a very important part of the process of affirming the effectiveness of your leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it in two respects. One is it's much like what I did at General Motors when I sat down with the head of the UAW when I first had the assignment and sat down and said, look, we're basically partners here. Without government capital, this company won't exist. without you, we can't make cars. And so we have to work together, and really, I mean, we actually developed a very effective partnership. We're friends today through the work we did, even though it was a lot of tough negotiations and a lot of back and forth.
Sure.
It didn't leave either of us happy at the end of the day. It's a hallmark of a good deal. Neither side's happy, but so that was kind of one piece of it. Is trying to do the exact same thing, and as we going forward. The other piece of it is I kind of think the role is basically a private sector perspective, so kind of like the CFO, the governor's the CEO, and you've got important, obviously it's a broader decision-making process given the importance of the legislature, but the CFO can play a critical role in both help working through the financial aspects of it and advising and working through developing the plan.
And you're going to find that one of the critical components of any solution is going to be pressure to use resources of state pension funds. And that's going to be a very, very difficult issue for you as the controller. Because whatever plan is put together is going to look to pension fund assets. Arthur Levitt, who was one of your distinguished predecessors, told me once that Governor Rockefeller said to him, "Arthur, I need you to do whatever he needed him to do." And he wanted access to assets in the pension fund. And Arthur Levitt said to me, I said, "Well, Governor, I can't do that." He said, "Well, you got to do it. The state needs it, and it's a desperate situation." So Arthur said to me, I said, "Governor, will you put it in writing?" Rockefeller would put anything in writing, he didn't care. So he was very, very smart, by the way, but he was sort of a cavalier kind of person. He said, "Sure, I'll put it in writing." He sent them a letter, and Levitt did what he wanted them to do. It would be very difficult to navigate that process.
Levitt did help hold the line when, because I agree that the first duty of the controller has to be protect the fund, and particularly give his fiduciary responsibility. Levitt did hold the line later, right, when I thought he was asked to